So 3 very popular PC games released on the same exact day last week. Not sure whose smart idea that was, but either way, I'm gonna be trying to benchmark all of them, and today we're starting off with Far Cry New Dawn. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be benchmarking the new Far Cry New Dawn with some very popular used graphics cards here in 2019 and with a system that you would actually pair with one of these GPUs. And if you're new here and you want to see more benchmarking or PC building videos, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But before we get into it, let me quickly introduce the sponsor of today's video, Dev Mountain. Dev Mountain is a 13-week class for all of you aspiring iOS and web developers out there. Their 13-week class focuses on providing you only the skills that you actually need to go out there and start your new career in coding. They don't waste time with a filler curriculum like at a traditional college. They also feature student housing at no extra cost, a variety of different classes including UX design and QA testing, and most importantly, all of this is available at an affordable price. Head on down to that first link in the description to learn more if you're interested in getting that quick boost you need to start your new career in coding and design. So for today's testing, I have 9 budget graphics cards that we'll be testing with, and I have a feeling that a lot of you are rocking one of these, or at least a card with similar performance to one of these. For those of you that just want to see the benchmarks and you don't care about my intro of these cards, the testing platform, or my method of benchmarking, then feel free to skip to this time frame in the video. You're welcome. If not, then starting with the NVIDIA cards, today we have the GTX 660 Ti, GTX 750 Ti, GT 1030, GTX 1050 Ti, and the GTX 1060 3GB. For our AMD cards, we have the HD 7850, the R7 360, the RX 460, and finally the RX 480. Now obviously there's other graphics cards out there right now. I say this in every benchmarking video. These are just the graphics cards that I have available today for testing, and all of these are actually pretty popular here in early 2019. For our testing platform, you guys already know that we're rocking our trusty Dell Optiplex, which is rocking an Intel i5 3570 clocked at 3.8 GHz. It has 16 GB of DDR3 RAM, a 450 watt power supply, and Far Cry New Dawn is installed on a budget inline 120 GB SSD. In my opinion, this is a perfect testing rig because this is a realistic system that you would actually pair with these GPUs, and the CPU didn't really bottleneck us at all. Also, before getting into the actual benchmarking results, if you guys haven't purchased Far Cry 5 New Dawn yet, then feel free to use my SCD key link down in the description to actually knock the price from $40 on Steam down to $31. That's almost 25% off, which is pretty crazy for a brand new game. For our benchmarking method, Far Cry New Dawn has a built-in benchmarking tool, so I use that to keep all of these GPUs on a level playing field. I did compare these results with benchmarking during actually playing the game, and they were pretty similar, so the results that I show are what you can pretty much expect when you're playing. Speaking of which, here's a chart showing off what every card could do with the exact same settings, 1080p and low with TAA turned on. I'm about to show you what settings I recommend you use for each card right after this, but for those of you that like the comparison, here you go. Now for my recommended settings, I also always say this during my benchmarking videos, but these are the settings that I would use personally if I were using one of these graphics cards, and I always tend to aim for that 50 to 60 FPS mark. With that being said, the first card up was the GTX 660 Ti, and to put us in the FPS sweet spot, I had to crank the resolution down to 720p with low settings in TAA, and with that I averaged 57 FPS. Next up was the 660 Ti's direct competitor, the 750 Ti, and with this card I used the same settings, but I actually had to drop all anti-aliasing to keep us above our minimum of 50 FPS, which is actually right where we got with this card. Next up was the super budget GT 1030, and for this card I actually couldn't get above that 50 FPS mark because even in 720p with low settings and no anti-aliasing, I only averaged 44. Keep in mind that this was still a very playable 44 FPS, so I really won't worry about that here. Following that, I tested the GTX 1050 Ti, and here we can finally see Far Cry New Dawn in 1080p, and with low settings in TAA, I averaged 52 frames per second. And to wrap up our NVIDIA cards for the day, the 3GB GTX 1060 was up next, and in 1080p with high settings in TAA, I averaged 63 frames per second. It's good to see us playing in high settings, but I think this goes to show that Far Cry New Dawn isn't the most optimized game in the world right now, especially since the graphics don't look that great in my opinion. Transitioning over to our AMD cards for the day, the HD 7850 was up next. Make sure you check out my 3-way comparison of this card versus the 660 Ti and 750 Ti by the way, and here in 720p with high settings in TAA, I averaged 54 FPS. Next up was the R7 360, and for this one I had to drop down to our popular 720p and low settings, but I did manage to average just above our 60 FPS mark. The RX 460 followed up next, and possibly for the first time ever in my benchmarking videos, I found that 900p was actually the sweet spot for this card because with high settings it averaged 50 FPS. You could definitely play in 1080p with slightly lower results if you wanted to, but I feel like 900p with high looked pretty decent, and this is what I'd recommend. And finally, the last card up was the RX 480. Can we even call call this one a budget graphics card, by the way, and here in 1080p with ultra settings and TAA, aka max settings, here I average 62 frames per second. So there you have it, that wraps up my benchmarking results, and in my personal opinion, I think it's safe to say that Far Cry New Dawn isn't that optimized because I feel like these cards should be getting way better results for a game that looks the way this one does. As you can see here in 1080p and ultra settings, the graphics just aren't that crispy and clean, so I really wish this one was a bit more optimized, but honestly, I didn't really expect anything differently because this is about the same as Far Cry 5 was last year. Well, there you have it, that wraps up my Far Cry New Dawn benchmarking video with 9 budget graphics cards. Now feel free to head on over to one of these 2 videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit the subscribe button because later this week, we have some more benchmarking to do. You don't want to miss that video.